It's reflections and recollections galore right here on Morning Live as we continue our tribute to Bra Willie. And our next guest met Ntate Keorapetse Kgosietsile in 1997 in Tanzania, and the two went on to become close friends. We are referring to South African poet, short story writer and novelist, who's one of the creatives we've invited to help pay us tribute to the National Poet Laureate and liberation struggle icon. Now, Bra Willie's fellow writer and close friend joins us now to give more insight into this man who was small in stature but was a larger-than-life figure. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Morning to your listeners and audience.
Indeed. Now, take us back to your first meeting with Bra Willie in 1977. Where was this, and what was happening then?
Well, I knew of Bra Willie long before I met him. I was in exile in Botswana in 1977, 76, and we traveled with a whole group of students who had left South Africa after the conflagration of June 1976.
Okay.
We were going to Nigeria to Festac, that is the World Festival of Black and African Culture and Arts. And this was a month-long program, February to March. And so we picked up Bra Willie with a lot of other musicians and a lot of other students, a lot of poets, people like Jonas Gwangwa. So the two of them became the leaders of our contingent to Festac in Nigeria. Yeah. That's where I met him, and I was struck by, first of all, in his house where he lived, where he was a professor at the university. It was wall to wall with books, and I spent just about all the time I was there looking through his prodigious library.
And during his time in the United States, he wrote quite extensively on the influence of jazz music on the African American culture and on the unity of the African diaspora. What was it about these subjects that were close to your heart?
Bra Willie was very involved in the lives of musicians. Even at the time when we were in Festac, he was together with people like Johnny Jani, South African musicians who were in exile, Julian Pahula, Louis Moholo, and he has always celebrated jazz musicians, people like Cassandra Wilson, Mongo Santa Maria. He writes poems about that because that was his lifeblood. I don't think he could write without it being in the rhythm of music.
Yeah, and take us through some of the experiences that you had with him in the United States.
Well, I wasn't with him in the United States. Okay. I was with him in Festac from 1977.
Yeah.
And then after that, we worked together when we were setting up the Department of Arts and Culture of the African National Congress in Lusaka. Okay. So for all those years, he was the person that was incredibly inspirational. He helped in giving voice and content to the ANC's Mandla Cultural Ensemble. That was the kind of creative person he was. In the US, I know that he was incredibly influential. In fact, when we were there in Festac, we were walking along Dafao Balewa Square to where a performance was going to take place. And all of a sudden, there came a whole troupe of African Americans, some of them very big women, big men, and they just said, "Willie!" and they picked him up, you know, the way you pick up a trophy. And so he was that popular, that influential a person.
Yeah.
In the US, you know that he formed a lot of organizations and interacted with the civil rights movement. He essentially politicized a lot of the content of the American experience. The Last Poets, a cultural troupe that gave the world rap music, owes the name The Last Poets to Bra Willie. They named themselves after him.
And what, in your view, would you say, did he treasure the most on earth?
I think what he loved most on earth was integrity. He was very, very, very close to his family, to his children, and but the most important thing for him was integrity and to make sure that he would nurture the talents of young people. You saw, you've just been with Lebo Mashile here.
Yes.
These are some of the examples of the people he interacted with, he animated, he influenced.
Yeah.
And of course, anyone who came across him, who was with him in any circumstance, found that there was something to take away from Bra Willie.
And how do you think he connected South Africa to the diaspora and the globe as a whole? And how did he manage to do that?
Well, I call him the unofficial ambassador to the world, South Africa's unofficial ambassador to the world, in the sense that even at the time in the 1960s, when South Africa was a hot issue, you know, after the Sharpeville massacres and the rest of it, he managed to make sure that the musicians and the writers and the performers in the US and in other parts of the world were attuned to the realities of South Africa. He traveled the world. He went all over, to Tashkent, to Mongolia, to China, to the Soviet Union then, and helped also in the formation of some of the most important journals, you know, which celebrated South Africa, Africa, and the world.
Ntate, thank you so much for joining us. And, you know, his spirit and his soul and his legacy lives on. Thank you so much for sharing his legacy with us. We appreciate it. Well, that is a fellow writer and close friend of the National Poet Laureate and liberation struggle icon, Professor Keorapetse Kgosietsile, Mandla Langa, helping us to pay tribute to Bra Willie. Well, Ntate Kgosietsile died on Wednesday after being admitted to hospital shortly before the news.